Welcome back to Bioclass Bites. In this video, we are going to talk about bioenergetics. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. So this video is part of Grade 11 Earth and Life Science, Unit 4 Bioenergetics. So these are the things we will talk about in this video. The cell is the basic unit of life, how photosynthetic organisms capture light to form sugar molecules, and how organisms obtain and utilize energy. Before we continue, I recommend that you watch this video entitled The Complexity of Life. This will set the mood for the entire unit, as this will show us why it is important to actually look into the cellular activities of organisms to see that's actually the level of organization in which the transformation of energy occurs. So for this video, I'll provide the link in the description below. So this will just be a quick recap of your lesson from grade 8 about cells. So I hope you still remember that a cell or the cell is the smallest unit of life. It means that this is the smallest structure capable of performing independent metabolic processes and activities. This is known as the building block of life because in the different levels of organization, from the cellular level and above, those are the levels that correspond to living organisms. It means that as you go higher, you actually have a bigger level of organization. We will have a recap of that later. But the lowest level wherein it can be considered a living thing, that will be the cellular level. So the cell is the basic structural and functional unit of all known living things. This is actually one of the tenets or principles of the cell theory, if you still remember. So all living things must be made up of cells here on Earth. Okay, so far. So all living things, all known, even those who are already dead or those who are already extinct, as long as they are classified as living organisms, they must be made up of cells. If you're just made up of molecules or atoms, then you're not considered a living thing. That's the reason why viruses are halfway between living and non-living things. They are not categorized as living things because they are just mostly made up of RNA and a protective coating, but they are not cells. They are molecules. They are technically non-living things that invade living things and procreate inside living things. So technically, they are not really considered living things. There are several ways to categorize cells. I hope you still remember. Cells that are too small to be seen by the naked eye, that requires the use of the microscope, are called microscopic cells, such as your Escherichia coli here or E. coli. So these cells are microscopic. They are very, very small. And each one of this is counted as one organism. Okay, so they are also considered unicellular organism. So just one cell. They are made up of only one cell. While those cells that are big enough to be seen by the naked eye are called macroscopic, such as your chicken egg here, which is actually the egg cell. Okay, egg cell of the chicken. Okay, so they're big. We can see it. We even cook it. We even eat it. So that's one cell, but it's big. It's macroscopic. And the same with an ostrich egg. This is the egg cell of the ostrich. This is probably as big as your head. And it's just made up of one cell, but it's big, so it's considered a macroscopic cell. So other organisms are considered multicellular because just like humans and other animals and other the things the organisms that you see around us are considered multicellular because we are made up of several cells. Okay, the human body is actually made up of trillions of cells, so we are definitely multicellular. So here are the levels of organization I was talking a while ago. So just a review. So we start off with the basic one at the bottom. So that would be atom. Then the next level would be molecule, followed by organelle. So as you go higher, it becomes bigger and more numerous. Organelle, cell, followed by tissue, organ, organism, population, community, ecosystem, and biosphere. So this is the smallest and the lowest level atom. Then this is the biggest and the highest level biosphere. So again, what's the definition of the following levels? So these atoms are the smallest components of an element having the chemical properties of that element. So I hope you still remember atoms. So elements have carbon atoms, hydrogen atoms, oxygen atoms. But if you put them together and they have certain bonds, ionic bonds or covalent bonds, then they can form molecules. Okay, the simplest structural unit of an element or compound. So, for example, carbon is an atom, but carbon dioxide is a molecule. It's made up of one atom of carbon and two atoms of oxygen. So hydrogen is an atom, but carbohydrate or glucose is a molecule. C6H12O6 is actually a glucose molecule. So water is also a molecule, two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. So in living systems, some of these molecules can actually arrange themselves and they can actually create an organelle. So organelle is a specialized part of a cell that perform a specific function inside it. So this is the next level of organization. Now, in order to be considered a living thing, you have to be made up of cells. Okay, that's what I was talking a while ago. So cells or cellular level is that level to be counted as a living thing. So cells are the basic structural and functional unit of all living things. They are unicellular organisms. They are considered living things because they are made up of a cell, even if it is just a single cell. Now, in multicellular organisms, cells can form and aggregate or attach to each other or form a bond with each other or clump together to form a similar structure and perform the same function. So we call that a tissue. So for example, several muscle cells can form a muscle tissue, or several brain cells can form a brain tissue, or several blood cells can actually form blood, which is actually a tissue. Okay, so those tissues could form an organ. Okay, so an organ is a fully differentiated structure in an animal that is actually specialized for a particular function. So several brain tissues can become the organ brain. Several heart tissues or numerous heart tissues can form your organ. So as you go higher, they become more complex, okay, and actually quite bigger. Now, organs in a body can form an organ system, and then overall it can form an organism. So an organism is a living thing that has the ability to act or function independent from its surrounding. But we also have cells that are considered organisms, well, because they exist as unicellular organisms. But for this part, these are mostly for multicellular organisms. Now, if several organisms of the same species, by the way, I want to emphasize, species is always pronounced as S with letter S, always in its plural form. Species, even if you're just talking to one kind. Okay, so by the way, one of the many definitions of species is that they are made up, these are organisms so closely related, they are so closely related with each other that they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So that's one of the many definitions of species. So organisms of the same species inhabiting a given area is called a population. So human population, lion population, dog population, tree population, bee population, as long as they belong to the same species and they inhabit a given area, we call them population. Community are made up of several species, okay, of different kinds, okay, and they live or inhabit the same region and they interact with each other, so we call that community. So for example, a community, for example, of wild dogs interacting um, with rabbits or interacting with their prey, whatever smaller mammal. Then you have your trees, then you have your grass, then you have your insects. So those are different species interacting with each other. We call that a community. So for example, different type of fish or species of fish in a coral reef. So that those are considered a community. Now, if those organisms in that community interact with their physical environment, so that's where water would come in, or soil would come in, or the mountain, or the atmosphere. So non-living components or the physical environment, if they interact with their physical environment, then we call that an ecosystem. Okay, so living things plus their physical environment, we call it ecosystem. And then all the ecosystems in the world make up the biosphere. I hope you remember this as one of the spheres of the Earth. So the biosphere is the regions of the surface and atmosphere of the Earth where living things can exist. So all the ecosystems in the world make up that layer of life called biosphere. Here are more examples of levels of organization. So as you see here, you start off with atoms, then you have a molecule, then you have your cell, and within the cell you have your organelles. Then cell, you have a tissue, for example, bone tissue. Then the organ is the actual bone, and then the bone can form the skeletal system, and then skeletal system plus digestive plus respiratory plus circulation, and all the organ systems can become the organism. So in this case, elephant. But then if there's a herd of elephant or several numbers of elephants of the same species, we call that elephant population. And then if those elephants interact with the giraffes, with the, what's this? Is this a deer or cat, or what's this? Deer, then tree and other organisms, then it's now a community. And if that community interacts with their physical environment, such as the sun, the mountain, the soil, water, then it becomes an ecosystem. And then all the ecosystems in the world is your biosphere. Okay, so same example here. Mol, atom, molecule, organelle, cell, tissue, organ, organism, population, community, ecosystems, and then biosphere. So these are more detailed discussions. So we can actually cluster the levels into lower levels. So those are the small levels, or smaller levels, from atom to cell, tissue, organ system, up to the organism. So these are the lower levels of organization. You can read the description here. And then higher level, so these are more numerous. So from population to a community, then ecosystem, then biosphere. So those are the higher levels of organization. If you're interested, you can visit this interactive website from learn.genetics to see different cell sizes and scale. I'll provide the link in the description below. So the word cell comes from the Latin term cellula, meaning a small room. Okay, so this was coined by Robert Hooke. So the term cellula was eventually reduced to cell, so that's the origin of the cell. And Robert Hooke, when he published his work in 1665, when he was playing around with his microscope, he was able to see the cork cells. Okay, so those are that's the outer layer of a plant. Then he looked at it under his microscope, and then he saw these structures, and he said they look like small rooms that monks or priests or nuns used to sleep in, and it's called cellula, so he called it cellula. Okay, so small rooms monks live in. So eventually the term cellula is reduced to cell. So this is Robert Hooke. Okay, so this video will transition our discussion about cells into bioenergetics. This one is actually quite a long video, but this is a scientist, a scientist presenting the work of his group, wherein they were able to come up with computer animations that show us how the different workings of the cell can be visualized. Okay, so this was from Drew Berry, Animations of Unseeable Biology. I'll provide the link in the description below. So they were able to see RNA. They were able to see some of the molecules of the cell, some of the organelles of the cell doing their jobs. So I recommend that you watch this video. Very interesting. An ecosystem can be categorized into its abiotic, factors and its biotic factors or abiotic constituents. So those are the non-living components of an ecosystem, including the minerals, climate, soil, water, and sunlight. So non-living factors, and all the living factors. So that will be biotic factors. So that will be the community or the living organisms in that ecosystem. So ecosystem is made up of abiotic and abiotic factors. So linking these two factors or constituents together would be the flow of energy within the ecosystem and the cycling of nutrients within this level of organization. For this video, we will mostly focus with flow of energy through the ecosystem. So this one is from Britannica. This is actually quite an interesting page, but I recommend that you watch this video from that page. I'll provide a link in the description below, wherein it talks about the energy flow using beautiful imagery, beautiful video shots of wherein it talks about energy flow in a given ecosystem, specifically from autotrophs to heterotrophs. So we will learn more about these words as we go along. So please visit this website, very interesting video. So we have to remember that in a living system, energy is constantly moving, okay? And it follows for living systems, they follow a one-way direction. Okay, so that one-way direction of flow of energy is known as one-way direction is known as the flow of energy in an ecosystem. Okay, and for living systems, for ecosystem, do not forget that the sun, our sun, is the major starting point of that one-way direction. It only goes one way, and the starting point is the sun. Okay, so I hope you are already familiar with these terms. Photosynthesis requires the input of the sun. So this is the process by which algae and plants harness energy from the sun to produce food. However, a small group of organisms are capable of still performing synthesis or still producing food even in total darkness, and it's called chemosynthesis. So these are performed by chemosynthetic bacteria or those primitive cells that live in hydrothermal vents or abyssal plains. So they can still harvest energy, but this does not include the sun anymore. They use the chemicals in their environment, and that's called chemosynthesis. Okay, so that's what I was talking a while ago. A small percentage of organism, instead of using the sun, they use sulfur compounds and other molecules in hydrothermal sea vents or volcanic sea vents as their source of energy. Okay, so they call it chemosynthesis. So they're capable of making their own food, just like photosynthesis. So in this video, we are going to focus on the major pathway of energy that takes place on our planet. So the majority of that pathway, and again, it always begins with the sun. So green plants and algae, trees, what else? Flowers, everything. Those organisms you see around you are capable of converting solar energy into chemical energy. So transformation of energy from solar to chemical in the process of photosynthesis. And the final output of photosynthesis is to create this sugar molecule or glucose molecule with this molecular formula C6H12O6. This is something you have to memorize, okay? Very important. So this is a molecule made up of 6 atoms of carbon, 12 atoms of hydrogen, and 6 atoms of oxygen. Now, in the bonds of these molecules, that is where chemical energy is stored. So plants harvest energy, processes it in their chloroplast, convert it into chemical energy, and store that energy in the bonds of the glucose molecule. Okay, so green plants convert harvest sun energy and convert carbon dioxide and water into sugar molecule. So photosynthetic organisms who are capable of doing that amazing process are called producers in an ecosystem because their role is to actually produce the energy and provide it to the rest of the members of the ecosystem. They actually harvest energy, store it in their body, and when they are eaten, they transfer that energy to their consumer. So they are a very important part of the ecosystem because they convert this unavailable solar energy into something that we can consume, food, in their bodies. So they use the energy from the sun to produce their own food, and in the same way, when they're eaten, we get that energy. So this food is simply a source of energy that organisms can store for later use. So the process of photosynthesis is quite um, complicated. It actually has a light reaction, Calvin cycle, electron transport chain. I recommend that to watch this video repeatedly if you have to, so that you will have a big. This video will explain it better because of the animation. It could help a lot. So it will you will have a better understanding of how photosynthesis occurs, how plants convert light energy to chemical energy. And I'll provide the link in the description below. But this is the overview. This is what plants do. They capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and collect water from the soil through their roots, harvest energy from the sun, perform photosynthesis in their cells, in their chloroplast, with the green pigment chlorophyll, to produce glucose molecule, that carbohydrates. Remember, the chemical formula for glucose is C6H12O6, carbohydrate. Carbon, hydrate, hydrogen, oxygen. Okay? So produce that C6H12O6 glucose molecule or carbohydrates. Their byproduct or their waste is oxygen, and they release it into the atmosphere. So for plants, their waste is carbon dioxide. Their waste is oxygen. What they need is carbon dioxide, which is the total opposite for animals. Our waste is carbon dioxide, and what we need is oxygen. So isn't that, if this does not blow your mind, I cannot, okay? Imagine that for other organisms, their waste is our treasure. What they consider waste is what we actually need, and what we consider waste, carbon dioxide, is what they need to perform their life processes. So that's just one conclusive evidence of interdependence and interaction of living things in an ecosystem. And I think that whenever I'm reminded of that, that's actually an amazing thing, a mind-blowing thing. Nothing is wasted in a fully functioning ecosystem. So this video from Ricochet Science is another simplified explanation of photosynthesis. I recommend that you watch it. Very, very important. Watch it repeatedly until you understand it. I'll provide the link in the description below. So photosynthesis again is a process used by plants and other organisms, photosynthetic organisms, to convert light energy into chemical energy. So they store solar energy into the chemical bonds of the glucose molecule. So the chemical energy is stored in carbohydrate molecules. So this is the complete chemical equation of photosynthesis. You've done chemistry. I hope that, this will not be too hard for you. So this is the chemical equation. So plants will take 6 carbon dioxide molecules from the atmosphere and 6 water molecules from the soil to capture light energy with the help of the green pigment chlorophyll and store it in the chemical bonds of a single glucose molecule which is made up of 6 carbon atoms, 12 hydrogen atoms, and 6 oxygen atoms. C6H12O6, and they release 6 molecules of oxygen as byproduct, oxygen molecule as byproduct. Okay, so 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water to produce 1 glucose molecule and give off 6 oxygen molecules as byproduct. So that's the process of photosynthesis. So water from the soil, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, solar energy, plus 6 molecules of carbon dioxide and 6 molecules of water just to get one glucose molecule and also a byproduct of 6 oxygen molecule. So the outputs or products of photosynthesis are sugar molecule and oxygen molecules. So how about those non-photosynthetic organisms like humans? Those creatures who cannot perform photosynthesis, they cannot make their own food, they cannot perform chemosynthesis. How do they get their energy? So they have the process called cellular respiration. And if you still remember your lesson on organelles of the cell, cellular respiration happens in the mitochondrion. Okay? That's why you remember that meme that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's actually true because that is where energy is harvested through the process of cellular respiration. So I recommend that you watch this video again from Ricochet Science. They have a simplified explanation of cellular respiration processes. It's quite detailed and complex, and I'll provide a link in the description below. So what is a cellular respiration? So this is a metabolic reaction that takes place in the cells of organisms like humans. So if we have 1 trillion cells, all those 1 trillion cells are performing cellular respiration. So how do they do that? They convert biochemical energy from nutrients that they eat into adenosine triphosphate. So that's the energy molecule that we use. ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And they release waste products as as part of the process. So what are those waste products? We will see. So again, cellular respiration are performed by non-photosynthetic heterotrophic organisms in their mitochondria to harvest energy from the food that they eat. So what do? They use one. So this is the chemical formula of cellular respiration. Yes, I know it's quite long. You have to memorize it. It is what it is. Okay. So one glucose molecule, one C6H12O6, 6 oxygen molecules, 6 water molecules, and we get it from our environment. Animals, heterotrophs, we get it from the environment. This is the reason why we need to breathe in oxygen. That's why we breathe in, we inhale, because we need that for cellular respiration. And that's why we need to drink water, because we need that for cellular respiration. Food, oxygen, water, basic needs of an animal, an organism, in order to harvest an ATP molecule or the ATP molecules. Okay? So once the cells have harvested ATP, it produces byproducts or wastes. And those are 12 water molecules, 6 carbon dioxide molecules, and heat. Heat. Okay? Heat, and these are all the byproducts. This is why we need to urinate and we need to breathe out carbon dioxide, because those are the byproducts of all the trillions of cells in your body. This is why we need to eat, we need to take in oxygen, and we need to drink water, just so we can harvest that chemical and that ATP from the chemical bonds of glucose, and why we need to get rid of body waste. We need to urinate because that's the collection of all the byproduct water of your cells that were collected by the blood and filtered by the kidney and stored in the urinary bladder. That's why we need to breathe out carbon dioxide. Those were collected by the blood from the cells in systemic circulation and through gas exchange in the alveoli of the lungs. They deposit that waste carbon dioxide, and this is why whenever we do work, our body gets heats up because it's a byproduct of cellular respiration. So I know you might not You may not appreciate it, but this is mind-blowing. It tells us everything about a living organism just because these are the processes performed by the cells of that organ. This tells us a lot about humans, why we need to eat, why we need to breathe in, why we need to drink water, so that we can have energy, and why we need to get rid of water, excess water in the form of urine, and breathe out, and why our body heats up whenever we do work. If this does not blow your mind, you have no emotions. Okay? You're a zombie. If this does not blow your mind, you're a zombie. So here is a more detailed illustration of cellular respiration from Ricochet Science. So cellular respiration is divided into the following processes: glycolysis, or the breakdown of glucose. Lysis is the term for that, breakdown of glucose. Then that happens outside the mitochondrion. So this is the organelle mitochondrion. And then the preparatory reaction, it happens in the mitochondrion, and then the citric acid cycle, and then the electron transport chain. So this will actually be discussed in the video. So so the first part of cellular respiration, glycolysis, our cells can harvest two ATP molecules, or two net gain of ATP. Now, during preparatory reaction, this is where the first batch of carbon dioxide waste is produced. During the citric cycle, another two net gain of ATP and another batch of carbon dioxide waste. And then in the electron transport chain, so this is where um, oxygen is used, and this is where water is also produced as a byproduct, just to harvest around 32 to 34 net gain of ATP. So that is just from one single glucose molecule. So we can get all this amount of ATP, or energy molecules. So to see side-by-side comparison of photosynthesis and cellular respiration, I recommend that you go to Bogo Biology. With this video, photosynthesis versus cellular respiration comparison. This will wrap up everything that we've discussed so far. I'll provide the link in the description below. So each organism on Earth must take energy from its environment to stay alive. So if you're a photosynthetic organism, if you're a plant or algae, you take it from the sun and from your atmosphere and from the soil. If you're an animal, you need to eat other organisms just to get that energy. So that transfer of energy, energy transformation from the environment into the body, happens at cellular level. The cells of all living things need constant inputs of energy so that they can carry out metabolic functions, which are necessary for that organism to remain alive, to grow, and to reproduce. Okay? So that's why basic needs of animals and for plants is to consume energy, either produce energy and then consume energy, just so they can perform their metabolic functions such as respiration, circulation, reproduction, and all those processes. So that's why we need to eat. We need to eat, we need to drink water, we need to breathe in oxygen just to get energy. So this one is actually an interesting video. Trophic levels, energy flow in an ecosystem. Very, very interesting. A short video, but very informative. Please watch this. Highly recommended. I'll provide the link in the description below. Now, these are some of the words that hopefully will help you understand better the relationships of living things in an ecosystem and how energy transfer happens, okay? But these are very easy terms to remember. So producers are called producers because they provide the source of energy, specifically chemical energy, for other organisms that eat them. So producers are your photosynthetic plants and algae. So they perform photosynthesis, they take in solar energy, convert it into chemical energy, and once they are eaten by other organisms, they transfer that energy. Organisms that use plants as a source of food are known as herbivores. Organisms that eat or prey on herbivores are called carnivores. Okay, so herbivores, those are animals or organisms that specifically eat plants. Okay, while those animals or insects or organisms that only eat meat are called carnivores. Those that can eat both plants and meat, such as humans, we are called omnivores. Omnivores. So this video is a very good one. It will summarize everything about cellular respiration. It's entitled Cellular Respiration Bioflix. Please watch this video. Very important. I'll provide the link in the description below. So this diagram shows us the overall flow of energy through living systems and through living things. And at each step, the transfer of energy will always involve the loss of energy in the form of body heat. So how does that happen? So let's review. Again, the flow of energy in an ecosystem is always in a one-way direction. It only goes one way. And the starting point is always the sun. So through photosynthesis, producers harvest energy and perform photosynthesis in their body and store solar energy into chemical energy into the chemical bonds of glucose molecule. As they perform their body activities, growing, reproducing, pollination, fertilization, and all that, they also release heat. Producers also release heat as a byproduct. Same way, not all solar energy that our planet receives are used by producers. Some are reflected back into the atmosphere. So when producers are eaten by herbivores, the chemical energy is now transferred and now it converted to so the glucose molecule is now converted to adenosine triphosphate to cellular respiration. So not all producers are eaten, so some die along the way. So that also gives off heat as a byproduct. Not all are eaten, but those that are eaten are used by the herbivores to perform cellular respiration by their mitochondria. And then as they perform their body activities, running, reproducing, respiration, circulation, and all that, they also give off heat as a byproduct. Now, not all herbivores are eaten by carnivores. Some die along the way. So as they die, they also release heat as a byproduct. But those herbivores that are eaten by the carnivores, okay, they now transfer their energy to the next level. So carnivores now have energy in their body, and as they perform their body activities, same running, metabolic processes, they also give off heat as a byproduct. So the transfer of energy in an ecosystem always go in one way. It always starts with the sun. And for every body activities performed by the living organisms, they give off heat as a byproduct. And every time they die or they are not utilized, they also give off heat as a byproduct. So these are concrete examples. Okay, so when you exercise, we get hot. So for example, we are carnivores. When we perform body activities, we get hot. So the heat that you feel results from the energy transfer that happens as you move, okay, as your bones move, as your muscles move. And when you sweat, your body expends energy to cool itself down. Now, people, I hope by this time you know that sweating is actually a cooling process. Perspiration is a cooling process. So when your body is too hot, the body will release fluids from the sweat glands. So that fluid will now be on top of your skin, on top of your epidermis. And of course, because of heat, the water or the fluid will evaporate, the sweat will evaporate. So as it evaporates, it takes with it the heat from the body, cooling the body down. So when we're perspiring, it's actually the body's way of cooling itself down. That's one metabolic process. That's one regulatory process that the body performs to maintain homeostasis. If you still remember our lesson from the previous units, one of the things that we've talked about is that the Earth, in terms of energy, is considered an open system. It means that we are constantly receiving energy from the sun, and we are also giving off heat or emitting heat back into space. We also reflect solar energy back into space because of the protection of our ozone layer. So please note that even if we did not use all the solar energy and we just reflect it back into the atmosphere, this is not completely lost. Okay, these are not completely lost from the universe. Okay, since all the energy in the universe are actually considered constant, they are all accounted for, and this will now just be part. So since the earth and the sun and the earth is part of the universe, and then this energy just returns back into the universe, returns back into the outer space, it's okay because the amount of energy in the universe will not change. Okay, it remains the same. Okay, the amount of energy remains the same. We just bounce it off. It's now just in a different location, but it's still energy. It's still out there. It's still accounted for. It's just not just within our bodies, not just within the cells of organisms, but just there in outer space. So again, according to the laws of thermodynamics, first law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So these are not destroyed. Okay, can never be created nor destroyed, but only converted from one form to another. So now, if that solar energy was not utilized by the cell by the autotrophs or by the producers in our planet, now it's just part of cosmic energy. It's now just part of outer space. But for living organisms, as energy move between them, some of the energy may be lost in the form of heat. We've talked about that here. As we move around, as we perform our body functions, we lose some of that energy in the form of heat. Right now, my body is emitting heat. I'm just sitting down. I'm just talking to you. I'm just recording. But my body is emitting heat because I'm doing work. Okay? So it's okay. So that thermal energy escapes into the environment, and while it is no longer useful for other organisms, it is not destroyed. It's now just out there, okay? But it's not destroyed. Okay, so that ends our first video. I hope you learned something new today. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. Till next time, goodbye.